The night air outside Bethany was cold enough to sting the lungs, but inside the stone chamber carved into the hillside, the air felt heavy and still. No torches flickered. No oil lamps burned. The door had been sealed from the inside with a slab of limestone that blocked even the moonlight. 5 figures sat in a loose circle on the packed earth floor, listening to the slow rhythm of their own breathing. At the center sat their teacher, a quiet man named Alone. His voice, when he finally spoke, did not rise above a whisper, yet it carried clearly in the darkness. "You have been taught to fear shadows," he said softly. "Tonight you will learn what the shadows fear." None of the 5, Merrick, Tuvin, Sarah, Daniel, and little Ephra, could see his face. They could only sense the calm in him, a steadiness that felt like standing beside deep water. Alone reached beneath his simple linen garment and drew out something hanging from a cord around his neck. They heard the faint scrape of metal against fabric. "This has rested against my skin since before the river immersion," he said. "It is older than the temples men boast about. Older than the empires that rise and fall." Merrick shifted slightly. "Is it a charm, teacher?" "It is not a charm," Alone replied. "It is a remembrance." He let the object fall lightly against his chest. Even in the dark, they sensed its presence, as if the room had subtly shifted. "There are forces that move through this world," he continued. "Not horned beasts from children's stories, but patterns, currents of thought and emotion that are not born in you, yet pass through you as if they were." Sarah swallowed. "The heaviness, before we act with courage?" "Yes," Alone said. "The whisper that says you are small. The fog that descends when clarity would free you. These currents feed on certain tones of the heart: fear, shame, despair. They cannot create. They can only siphon." He paused, letting the silence settle deeper. "In the old writings," he went on, "they are called the wardens. Not because they guard you, but because they guard the enclosure." Tuvin's brow furrowed. "An enclosure?" "This realm," Alone answered gently. "It is shaped by a lesser craftsman. Not the infinite source, not the boundless mind that births all light. A lesser artisan who fashioned structure but could not breathe living fire. So he harvests what he cannot generate." The words did not sound wild in the dark. They sounded measured, almost tender. "And this metal?" Daniel asked quietly. Alone touched the object at his chest. "There are materials in this earth that still hum with an older note. A resonance from before the enclosure was sealed. Most matter is quiet, compliant, easily shaped by the warden's currents. But a few elements remember." He let the metal slide between his fingers. "This is one of them." Ephra, the youngest, leaned forward instinctively. "What does it do?" "It does nothing," Alone said, and there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "Until it touches one who remembers as well." The chamber seemed to grow even stiller. "When raw iron rests against living skin," he continued, "and the one who wears it knows what they are, not hopes, not believes, but knows, its resonance aligns with the spark within them." "The spark?" Sarah whispered. "The fragment of the boundless," Alone said. "Placed in you before breath first filled your lungs." He inhaled slowly, and they followed without being told. "The wardens move within a narrow range," he explained. "They cling to frequencies of contraction. But when iron synchronizes with an awakened spark, it creates a field that vibrates beyond their reach. They cannot pierce it. They cannot taste through it." Merrick let out a slow breath. "Then why is this not known everywhere?" "Because it makes intermediaries unnecessary," Alone replied. "If you can seal your own field, you do not require a gatekeeper. If you can commune directly with the boundless through your own awakened resonance, no throne or altar stands between. The weight of that settled over them, alone lifted the cord from his neck and held the object out. One by one, in the dark, each disciple reached forward to touch it. Cool. Dense. Simple, it is only iron, Tuvan murmured, surprised. Only iron, alone agreed. Common as soil. That is why it endures. He drew it back to his chest. You must understand, he said, voice softer now. The metal alone is inert. 1,000 men could wear it and feel nothing. It awakens in recognition. Recognition of what? Ephra asked. Of what you are. The teacher straightened his spine, and even in the darkness they sensed the shift in posture. Sit upright, he instructed quietly. Feel the line from the base of your spine to the crown of your head. Let breath move without strain. They obeyed. Place your hand over the center of your chest, he continued. Feel the rhythm beneath your palm. That rhythm is not random. It is the echo of something vast, sounding within you. The chamber pulsed with the synchronized breathing of 6 bodies. The first step, alone said, is preparation. Raw iron. Uncoated. Unadorned. It must touch skin. He paused. The second is recognition. No begging. No pleading. Only acknowledgement. His voice dropped almost to silence. You are not asking to be filled. You are remembering that you are already lit. Something in the air shifted then, not dramatic, not theatrical, but subtle, like the moment before dawn when night loosens its grip. Alone's final words that night were not loud. Tomorrow, when doubt arises, and it will, know this, resistance is the echo of a door closing. When the wardens lose access, they rattle the frame. Do not mistake the noise for authority. The limestone slab would be moved before dawn. The 5 would step back into the ordinary world of markets and stone streets, but each carried the weight of something simple and unadorned in their palm before they left, a small shard of iron, cool and waiting. The manuscripts that Merrick later copied by hand did not begin with miracles. They began with architecture. Long before imperial councils argued over doctrine, small circles of seekers passed around fragments of older writings, texts that spoke in careful, symbolic language about the structure of reality itself. In one such scroll, often attributed to a mystic called Yanan of the Desert, the cosmos was described not as a single harmonious creation, but as a layered construct. At the summit, beyond thought and division, was the boundless source, pure awareness, indivisible, without hierarchy or demand. It did not command worship. It did not punish. It simply radiated. Beneath that radiance, according to the scroll, something fractured. A lesser intelligence, named in the text the artisan, mistook its borrowed light for independent power. Fascinated with structure and limitation, it shaped a realm of density and time. Not out of cruelty, the scroll insisted, but out of ignorance. It could form matter. It could draft systems. But it could not ignite living consciousness on its own. So it worked with what had already been scattered, sparks of the boundless woven into fragile bodies. The artisan's helpers were not devils with horns. They were described as regulators, administrators of limitation. The text called them wardens, currents of constraint moving through perception itself. They did not shout. They suggested. They did not strike. They nudged. Sarah once described the experience to Daniel years after that night in the chamber. It is like a thought that feels like yours, she said quietly, but arrives too perfectly timed to weaken you. The scrolls claimed the wardens fed on contraction, fear, shame, resentment, hopelessness. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because that narrow band of emotion was the only range they could perceive clearly. Anything beyond it, genuine awe, steady courage, lucid stillness, blurred their senses, and then, in the margins of one brittle fragment, there was a passage that changed everything for those who recognized it. It spoke of certain materials within the artisan's creation that retained a vibrational memory of the higher radiance. Most matter, the text explained, had fully harmonized with the dense architecture of the constructed realm. But a few elements still carried a faint echo of pre-construct resonance. Iron was named explicitly, not gold. Not silver. Not gemstones prized by empires. Iron, the explanation was not mystical in tone. It was mechanical. Iron, the fragment said, holds a natural magnetic field. It generates polarity without external prompting. Where other metals remain passive until influenced, iron radiates on its own. In symbolic language, this was interpreted as a signature of remembrance, a material that did not fully surrender its original orientation. Tuvan, who had once apprenticed to a blacksmith, understood this in a grounded way. When iron is forged, he told Ephra, it sings differently than bronze. It resists differently. It keeps something. The early circles began experimenting quietly. Not with rituals of spectacle, but with stillness. Raw iron pieces were shaped into simple pendants, left uncoated, unpolished. They were worn against bare skin, just as Alone had instructed. What they reported was subtle clarity before sleep. A thinning of mental noise. A curious reduction in the sudden spirals of doubt that used to precede decisive action. No lightning split the sky. No visible shield shimmered around them. But something shifted in the texture of daily life. The scroll of Yonan suggested a reason. When iron rests against awakened skin, it said, two fields interact. The biological electromagnetic rhythm of the human heart, measurable even by the simplest instruments of the time, interlaces with the metal's polarity. If the bearer recognizes their own inner spark, this interlacing stabilizes into coherence. Coherence, the text implied, is invisible to the wardens. It is not that they are attacked. Not that they are destroyed. They simply cannot tune into that frequency band. Their access narrows, the artisan's architecture remains intact. The world does not collapse. But the siphoning weakens. Years after Alone's passing, imperial religion began consolidating authority. Councils were convened. Writings were sorted, sanctioned, or condemned. The more cosmological scrolls, those that described the artisan and the wardens, were labeled dangerous, destabilizing. Communities who persisted in wearing raw iron pendants found themselves questioned. Why do you not trust the sacramental protections? Officials would ask. Some complied. Many did not. There were edicts against unauthorized spiritual instruments. Amulets were confiscated under the pretext of superstition. In certain provinces, simple iron neckpieces were collected and melted down, recast into standardized symbols sanctioned by the state. Merrick, older now, hid several fragments of iron in the lining of his cloak when soldiers searched their gathering place. You can melt the shape, he whispered to Sarah afterward, but you cannot melt the memory. The teaching adapted. It went underground. Fewer public gatherings. More private instruction. The four-step alignment Alone had given in the chamber became central, not because it was dramatic, but because it required no institution. Preparation. Recognition. Declaration. Silence. 7 nights, they would say quietly. Not as magic, but as stabilization. The scrolls were copied smaller, margins tighter, language more coded. Instead of boundless source, they sometimes wrote great silence. Instead of artisan, they wrote lesser architect. Instead of wardens, they wrote narrow winds. But iron remained iron. What made the practice resilient was its simplicity. It did not demand wealth. It did not require sanctioned intermediaries. Anyone with access to raw metal and an understanding heart could attempt it. The wardens, if the cosmology was accurate, could not prevent a human from sitting upright, placing iron against their chest, and recognizing their own spark, and that, perhaps, was the quiet revolution. The 4 steps were never written as commandments. They were described more like coordinates, subtle alignments that, when followed with sincerity, formed a pattern stronger than any single action on its own. By the time Ephra had grown into a teacher in his own right, the gatherings were smaller and quieter. They met in courtyards at dusk, in workshops after tools were put away, in the back rooms of modest homes where no official would think to look. The iron pendants were plain. Some were no more than small, roughly hammered discs pierced with a hole for a cord. Others were simple rings flattened at one edge so they could rest directly over the sternum. No engraving. No ornament. The simplicity was intentional. On the first night of instruction, Ephra would say nothing mystical. Bring iron that has not been sealed in varnish or paint, he would tell them calmly. It must touch your skin. That is all. Preparation. He would demonstrate by lifting his own pendant, letting it settle against the center of his chest. Sit upright, he would continue. Not rigid. Just aligned. Let your spine feel like a column through which breath can travel. There were no chants, no incense clouds. Only quiet. Recognition came next. Do not beg, he would say softly. Do not plead for protection. Feel the weight of the metal. Feel the rhythm beneath it. Acknowledge what you are carrying. Some would close their eyes awkwardly at first, unsure what they were supposed to feel. Others would notice something subtle almost immediately, a warmth spreading beneath the iron, or a gentle settling in the chest. It is not imagination, Ephra would reassure them when questions arose later. But it is also not spectacle. It is coherence. Declaration was the only spoken part. I am not asking, they would say aloud, voices uneven at first. I am declaring. My field is steady. My energy is my own. No narrow wind may siphon what is not offered. The words varied slightly from circle to circle, but the tone remained the same, not defiant, not aggressive. Simply firm, then silence. 3 minutes at first. Later, sometimes longer, the silence was not empty. It felt like listening inwardly to a current that had always been there but drowned out by noise. Those who completed 7 consecutive nights described changes that were difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. A merchant named Leora reported that her habitual anxiety before negotiating prices softened. The spiral just didn't catch, she said quietly. It tried, but it slipped. A mason named Haroun noticed that when anger flared in crowded streets, it did not hook into him as easily. It passes through, he explained, like wind around a stone. Not everyone responded the same way. A few removed the iron after the 2nd or 3rd night, unsettled by the unfamiliar steadiness. Doubt would rise sharply. This is foolish, the thought would whisper. Metal cannot change consciousness. Ephra anticipated this. When resistance grows loud, he would tell them, do not argue with it. Observe it. The moment access narrows, the narrow winds test the threshold. Noise at the door does not mean the door is open. Over time, the practice required less conscious effort. The field, if one chose to call it that, felt self-sustaining. The iron no longer seemed like an object but like an anchor point, reminding the body of a frequency it already knew. Imperial scrutiny intensified in certain regions. Authorized clergy warned against unsanctioned objects worn for spiritual purposes. Some iron pendants were confiscated again. Fines were levied, yet the teaching endured because it did not depend on visibility. Even without the metal, those who had completed the 7 nights often reported that the alignment remained accessible. The iron had trained their awareness to recognize coherence. In his later years, Ephra would sometimes sit alone at dusk, pendant cool against his chest, and remember that first night in the sealed chamber. He remembered Alone's calm voice in the dark. The way the limestone door had shut out the world's noise. The simplicity of the revelation, not a jeweled relic, not an elaborate rite, iron, common, grounded, magnetically alive. What endured across generations was not the claim that iron destroyed unseen forces. It was quieter than that. It suggested that sovereignty did not require intermediaries. That coherence was not granted by authority but cultivated by recognition. The cosmology of the artisan and the wardens remained controversial, debated in whispered conversations and coded manuscripts. Some treated it as literal architecture. Others as metaphor for psychological patterns shaped by systems of control. The practice worked either way: sit upright, let raw iron touch skin, acknowledge the spark within, declare steadiness, enter silence. 7 nights after that, the world looked much the same: markets still loud, officials still watchful, arguments still flaring in public squares. But the inner landscape shifted for those who persisted, and perhaps that was always the point. The narrow winds could not be abolished by decree. The artisan's architecture did not dissolve overnight. But access narrowed where coherence grew. One evening, as a small group finished their 7th night, a young woman named Talia opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "It feels," she said, searching for words, "like the noise is farther away." Ephra nodded. "Not gone," he said gently. "Just no longer inside." He placed his hand briefly over his own pendant. "The rest," he added, "is living from that steadiness." The teaching never became an empire. It never sought to. It moved quietly through hands and hearts, as simple as the metal it honored. Iron remained abundant. Breath remained free. Recognition remained possible, and in that quiet continuity, the practice survived. In the end, what this story offers is not an invitation to superstition, nor a rejection of established faiths, but a meditation on sovereignty. Whether you interpret the artisan and the narrow winds as metaphysical beings, psychological constructs, or poetic metaphors for systems that thrive on fear, the underlying message is the same: coherence begins within. Iron, in this narrative, represents grounded remembrance. It is ordinary, accessible, unglamorous. That is precisely why it carries symbolic power. You do not need wealth, status, or permission to sit upright, breathe steadily, and recognize your own inner steadiness. You do not need spectacle to cultivate clarity. If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to pause after the video ends. Notice your posture. Notice your breath. Whether or not you ever place iron against your chest, the deeper practice is awareness, recognizing when contraction tries to take hold and choosing alignment instead. If you found value in this retelling and the ideas it explores, consider subscribing so you do not miss future reflections on hidden traditions and symbolic teachings. Gently tap the like button if the message felt meaningful, as it helps this conversation reach others who may be searching for thoughtful perspectives. And if someone in your life enjoys contemplative explorations of ancient cosmology, share this video with them and continue the dialogue together. Your engagement keeps thoughtful storytelling alive.